Good morning. I'm Karen. I'm from AC Education, and I am speaking this morning to Lisa Cherry. Lisa is a very well-renowned author, trainer, keynote speaker around trauma, resilience, and resonance. And we're very privileged to have Lisa with us this morning. Lisa, good morning. Thank you for being here. And can I ask, in this current climate, how are you feeling this morning?
Well, good morning. And it's very lovely to be here. And I'm well into week 4 now at home. And it's been a really interesting roller coaster journey that I think is worth mentioning and worth noting, because that's going to be similar for lots of people, depending on where you're at in that process. So today I'm good.
Good.
I wasn't at the beginning. But today I am, and I have been this week, and that's largely because I've had to put a lot of extra work into what we might call self-care, and I've been talking to people about self-care gold style, but actually I'd like to call it collective care, I think. And yes, that's my little puppy, who, of course, I don't know if you can hear him, but every time I go on a Zoom, he wants to join in. So
Aww.
If you don't mind to hear a whimpering puppy in the background.
We don't mind. We don't mind. And it's interesting that you raised the point of self-care, because that is what we're going to be discussing this morning. We're talking about self-care for parents and foster carers and anyone living with children and young people at this current time. Lisa, how are you managing your self-care?
Well, there are a number of things that I have always done. So just to give a little bit of background about that, my work around taking care of myself started in 1990. And it's been a very daily journey since then. And it started then because I ended up in an AA meeting and haven't had a drink since, and that's quite a long time ago. But
well
what that
you.
did, thank you, yeah. So what that did was that gave me a different rule book by which to manage my difficult and challenging emotions, because all alcohol and drugs are a self-medication. And once I was able to discover different ways of being and different ways of doing things, that really helped and supported me when things felt intense and difficult. So what's happening at the moment is that we are in a very intense and difficult period, and for some people this might well be the first time that they're having to intensify that self-care in a more rigid and structured way. So some of the things that I do every day that I have just upped a little bit, I make sure that I walk once or twice a day. I make sure that I eat 3 times a day regularly. I make sure that my food isn't processed. I make sure that it's as nutritious and home cooked as I can. Yeah. I make sure that I have solid sleep for 6 to 7 hours. It's not rocket science, this stuff, but actually what we're talking about today, what makes it harder, is that we're talking to parents and carers who are having those deep and difficult and intense feelings and emotions at the same time as the children that they are living with, and there's nowhere to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Lisa, what sort of changes in behaviour would you expect to see at this particular time, both from the children and the young people, and potentially even the adults as well?
Oh, from us all. I mean, this doesn't escape any of us. And I think that's the important thing here. If we're going to be talking about the children, we have to be talking about the adults as well. None of us gets out of here alive, and we all have a history that has created the person that we are today. So what I mean by that is we all have things that have happened to us, that things that are happening now may well be triggering us.
Yes.
And those triggers are invaluable tools because they tell us what we're supposed to be working with. The challenge, of course, is that how do we create a space where we can work on those things? So, for example, if you're somebody who has always felt quite anxious in the world, right now, your anxiety is going to be through the roof. You know, that's going to be the guidance that you're getting, which is, okay, I still have a lot of work to do around my feelings of anxiousness. If you're somebody who likes to control things because it helps you feel safe, and we know that control is very linked to all sorts of trauma behaviours because it's about seeking safety, right now, that's going to be going through the roof because we couldn't be in less certain times. Yeah. I mean, the irony is we're always living with uncertainty, but we like to think that we're not. We like to think that we know what's coming. And of course, when this pandemic came, just went, we had a very clear message that no, you never know what's coming. And that's going to be bringing up all sorts of feelings. So the behaviors are always going to be communicating those kind of feelings. Where that gets difficult is if everybody in the house is having those feelings. The challenge, of course, is that you are the adult. So as the adult, you really do have to tend to yourself first. And that can feel quite counterintuitive because, of course, we're the parent, we're the carer. But until you've dealt with your own stuff in that moment or in that period, you can't then go and deal with the stuff of a developing human.
Thank you. That's interesting. And obviously, given the talk about anxiety and our fears, obviously fear and anxiety themselves can be contagious, can't they?
Absolutely. You know, in the same way as it's all energy, right? So when you're emanating love and positivity, that's contagious. That's lovely to be around. Drains and radiators, you know, we go and find the radiator, go and hang out with them. We want to stand with them because they're fun and they're easy to be around and they're warm and they're loving. And then there's the drains, you know, there's the people you don't want to go and stand with because they just drain everything out of you and like, blah. And it's the same with fear and anxiety.
So how can parents manage that with their young people?
Yeah, well, they're going to have to go within first. And they're going to have to acknowledge stuff and they're going to have to get really honest. And that's difficult because you have to get to that place where you can say to yourself, I'm not coping very well. And then having those open conversations with your young people, age dependent, about how difficult things feel. And that I'm feeling those things too. While at the same time as having those honest conversations, you've also got to be the person that holds that space and says, but we're going to do this together.
Yeah.
I'm feeling this too. I'm wondering if you're feeling this. So we're curious. I'm wondering if that's what's going on for you. Because I haven't seen you do that for a while, whatever that behavior is. And be curious about what's going on. And by using your own vulnerability, those conversations become easier. What might it be that we can do together that might help us both? Because that shifts the power then, doesn't it? That stops.
Really does.
Yeah, that stops us saying, well, you're the one with the problem, so what should we do with you? But actually saying, I'm feeling this as well. What is it that we could do together that might help? You know, and I've heard parents talk about things, you know, like we baked a cake. You know, like we haven't baked a cake together for ages. When I go and walk the dog, I see families out walking the dog. It's an activity everyone's doing together. I think where this has got really complicated and where this is really going to create some challenges and some tensions is around the whole schooling thing. Because on top of everyone being in their environments, and we know that some of those environments are healthier than others, but on top of that, schools are quite rightly sending stuff home, and parents are quite rightly not sure how they apply that in their family home. And of course, we're all different. Some people are very compliant. So the school says you have to do this. They're like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do it. That's what's written on the sheet. Other parents are like, yeah, that's lovely, but have you seen our house today? Other parents are, yeah, well, that one's okay with structure, that one can't bear structure, that one loves a bit of structure, that one needs to have lots of fluidity. So that's a challenge as well, because that's around, sorry, my doorbell's just gone and I know it's a parcel, and that's the challenge, isn't it, of working from home. Shall I pop out and get it? Should we be really real?
I'll pause it. Really... Welcome back.
So, hello. Right. So there we are. We're so slick here. Yeah. And I think that's something really worth thinking about. My advice, actually, and I suspect any educator would probably say the same. If you've got a child who really likes to feel like they're doing schoolwork, they like some structure, and it works for your house to go between 9 and 10 we walk, between 10 and 11 we do some maths, if that works for you, do it. If what works for you is a much more fluid, gentle, chaotic, whatever, then do that. It's hard if you've got kids who one likes that structure and one likes the fluidity. That's challenging. But do what works for you.
It's also challenging when you've got children of a variety of mental health states at that particular time on any given day.
Yeah, and there's no rule book. There is no rule book for what you do when you're on lockdown from a pandemic, right? We don't know how to do this. We don't know the answers, right? So let's just get that out there. When I'm doing all these conversations, there are things I don't know and you don't know. I don't know what's best for child A in pandemic lockdown, but I do know my child.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to hang on to. And you know how your house works, and you know what makes it work best. And actually, we will be defined individually, in our families, in our communities, and in society by how we got through this pandemic. That's how we will be remembered. And for kids who are growing and developing, they will remember this time as being something. The time when I got to hang out with my mum more, the time when my dad was at home and I never got to see my dad because he was always at work, the time when I got to be with my dog all day long, the time when I was shut up in my room all day, the time when I kept being shouted at because they were working from home, and I guess it's up to us.
Those children who are still at school because their parents are frontline workers or they have a social worker, and that's also brings some unique challenges to the situation as well.
Absolutely. And that's going to be remembered as the time that none of my friends were at school, the time that I made new friends with somebody who was really nice because there wasn't anyone else for them to play with, so they played with me.
Yes.
The time when the teachers sat down and were able to answer questions that they've never had time to answer before. So there are a whole range of narratives that will come out of this experience, some of which we can guide and steer through the way we choose to live each day, and some of which we won't have masses of control over in terms of what's going on for children, young people online. What are they watching? What are they looking at? What narratives are they picking up? What news channels are they listening to? I mean, some people have become obsessed with the news. So if you've got the news on in your house all the time, your kids are listening to that too. They're soaking that up too. And you count how many times the word death is said in an hour. Right, that's going to raise some really interesting conversations that need to be had. So take control in that very fluid way. We will watch the news, but we're going to watch half an hour at lunchtime and a news conference in the evening. I mean, it's quite... Certainly last week, more so than this week, I found having a press conference quite comforting. I knew that at 5 o'clock every day, I was going to find out something about what's going on. As the days have gone on, I found that less so. But last week particularly, I found that helpful.
So in terms of being, I don't want to use the phrase stuck at home or forced to be at home. Let's reframe the narrative, as you say, in terms of being safe at home and dealing with possibly some challenging behaviours on a minute-to-minute basis, on a day-to-day basis. What sort of advice would you give to parents about reframing behaviours that they are seeing?
Well, I think it's clear to understand that none of us behaves in a certain way that isn't communicating something. You know, if I get to a place where I'm shouting, say, there's something else going on. I'm not someone who particularly shouts, but you know, if
Behaviour
that
is
happens,
communication.
yeah, if that happens, then I would hope that the people who love me around me would be able to go, okay, you know, there's something going on here for that to be happening. And I would argue that that's usually because I'm not feeling safe. I think if we use the lens of safety, that's going to help a lot of people when confronted with behaviours that they find difficult and challenging. You know, it would not be unusual, and let's talk about trauma triggers. In this, we are using language that is quite triggering. We're talking about lockdowns, isolation, death. You know, if somebody's got a history where they've had different things happen to them, and we're using those kinds of language, then of course you're going to see behaviours that suggest that that person is starting to feel very unsafe. So there's the dealing with stuff in the moment, and I would highly recommend that people who are working with children or living with children who have experienced trauma, Sarah Nash's stuff on therapeutic parenting, she's got parenting groups, she's got books. She's somebody definitely worth having a look at if you are working with children who've experienced early developmental childhood trauma, living with, sorry. So there's that stuff in the moment. How do you deal with that stuff in the moment? How do I help you feel safe in this moment? Now, the older your child, the harder that's going to be. The harder that's going to be. Yeah, because you're not that safe person necessarily for them at that time. And that is one of the hardest things about parenting.
Yep.
You know, when they're younger and you're their mama and their papa and you are their safe person, that's beautiful. But there's a point where they don't necessarily find us safe to be around. So that's a negotiation as well. That's a conversation as well. And that's triggering for the parent. Because I've always been your safe person. Why am I not your safe person now? You know, so this is multi-layered and multifaceted depending on the ages that you've got in the house. And then you've got the bigger stuff. How are you making sure that the food is nutritious? Again, that's been challenging because some shops haven't had any food in. Although I think that's calming slightly now. How are you ensuring that, you know, that you don't have as much news on or as much, you know, how are you kind of monitoring around going for walks, making sure there's fresh air, keeping people every hour. I was just talking about that on my Twitter, 21 Days of Self-Care. Every hour, my thing goes off to tell me how many steps short of 250 I am. And if I haven't moved for 250 steps, I jog for 250 steps to keep the body moving.
I've stopped wearing mine.
Have you?
I have. It was too depressing.
Well, can we just say for the purposes of the webinar that you were very, very poorly in bed for 2 to 3 weeks?
Yes.
So you probably did 3 steps a day. So nobody wants to see that on their Fitbit phone, do they?
Exactly. That's when I took it off.
Quite right too. Quite right too. Yeah. So look, none of these things are easy. Unless you're in a family where these things are easy. But if you've got challenges and difficulties, they're only going to be exacerbated. Okay? So I think that's a really important point. Yeah. It's like this experience highlights our vulnerabilities. It highlights where we're robust. it highlights our privileges. So lots of people talking about, gosh, thank God I've got a house to live in. Thank God that my parents only live down the road and I can see them. You know, that's not for everyone, by the way. You know, thank God that
drive past and wave at the window.
Yeah, hi. Thank goodness that I have got a well-stocked larder. You know, we're really getting down to basics because our privileges, the things that support us, are highlighted, and our vulnerabilities and the people that were on the edge of the cliff are going to fall off the cliff because it highlights those vulnerabilities. It's the same with the things that are a problem for us, the things that challenge us, and the things that challenge us in our relationships at home. They are only going to come more to the fore for you to work on. And that's going to feel really difficult because we didn't choose to be here, did we? We've landed here, we've got an opportunity, and it's what we do with that opportunity that's going to really matter.
Absolutely. So as we come towards the end of our chat, what advice would you give to parents and carers in terms of coping strategies and their own personal self-care?
Yeah, so all the stuff that I've said really, in terms of the basics, so managing the basic stuff, the sleep stuff, the food stuff, and your own support network, right? We haven't even talked about that. Your own support network has now become this online stuff, which is a poor relative of a hug. So if you're not getting hugs, learn to hug yourself. Just learn to hug yourself. If you're someone who's very tactile like me, learn to just stroke your arm. I mean, it sounds a little bit strange actually on a webinar to be stroking your arm, but you know, learn to spend longer brushing your hair. Spend longer in a hot shower. You know, have that sense of physicality that you're not getting. With having the support that you need effectively withdrawn, or your support that you normally have is with you all the time and they're struggling too, okay, that's going to be really difficult. So how are you seeking support? When I first started on this lockdown, I made a commitment to myself to have a phone call in the morning, a phone call in the afternoon, and a phone call at 7 o'clock with different people, professionally and personally. Now I can't get everyone off the phone, so now I've got to change that. But at the beginning, that really helped me to make sure that I was having my check-ins, my stimulating conversations. And if you've got a child that really doesn't want you to have that, then you may have to do that with them. You know, again, you have to think about what is going on in your house. How can you make things better in your house? Some things you're not going to be able to make better.
And how do you rationalize that in your head, though, that there is so much going on that you just can't make better, you can't control, you can't even have an impact on?
I think understanding and acknowledging that you were probably not in control in the first place is helpful. You know, we like to think that, you know, we've kind of got this whole life thing. You know, we do this, we do that, at this time this happens, and then when all of that collapses, actually, we don't have, you know, and we don't. And if you're into Buddhism, there, you know, this is the human struggle is of your own making. Your own suffering is because you think you've, you know, got control over everything. And I think for me personally, spirituality I find very helpful. Everyone's idea of spirituality is going to be very different. Milo, that's so noisy. Thank you. Everybody's, you know, you might have a religion, or you might just have a sense that there is something greater than you, or you might have a sense of a higher power. I'm going to pick that box up. Whatever it is that works for you, you're going to have to draw on that gold star. And I think that's the thing. whatever it is that works for you, you're going to have to draw on that gold star, and you're just going to have to up it and up it and up it, and keep having these types of conversations that have some depth and that have some emotional connection, because that also is something that's quite difficult when we're not with somebody, to have that moment of emotional connection that we might need, that helps us feel grounded and safe ourselves.
I'm finding that as a parent, I've taken to breathing just before a child asks me a question, a deep breath in and letting it go, and then I'm answering, because it's giving me a second or two to think about the answer, and also to regulate myself before I potentially then am needed to regulate my child. Are you finding breathing helping?
Oh, breathing. I mean, I haven't even talked about breathing. Breathing is my favorite go-to. And there are lots of different ways of breathing. A good breath that will just regulate your system is an in for 4, a hold for 4, and a long out breath. So we might do that now, where we would kind of go.
And you can feel the effect of that immediately.
I'm not even in the room with you, Karen. And the calmness that descends when we do that. And again, you know, you want to try and teach these skills to your children and young people. Depends how old they are. There is an age where saying to one of your kids, you know, shall we do some breathing? You know, there might be an off in it. You know, it's not really what people, you know, 14, 15, 16, should we do some breathing? You know, I always give the story of when I said to Zach when he came home from school once, I said, your energy seems quite uptight today. And he said, don't give me that energy shit. You know.
We might have to beat that out.
We're all grown-ups on here. We're all grown-ups on here. This is just for parents and carers, right?
This is, yeah.
They'll have heard it all before.
It's a safe space.
If they've got teenagers, that's the other thing, of course, because my children were never going to swear. And I think, you know, so you have to be age appropriate, but if you can, so with younger ones, it's much easier because you can do different activities that have the breath in it, you know, so you can have that short inhale, long exhale. Although this demands of you that you hold the breath, and that I think is what is the calming. So yeah, breath is a really big go-to space for me, definitely.
Good. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you. Keep breathing, keep looking after yourself, keep staying safe, and thank you again for being with us this morning and for giving up your time. And I look forward to catching up with you again very, very soon.
Thank you, Karen.